When told us last hour, Danny Denon.
The U.S. will decide to retaliate. It will be very painful for the Iranians. We support this attitude to put more sanctions, put more pressure. But if the Iranians will continue with provocations, I think the time will come that we will have to pay a price for that.
So now this hour, the latest on what we're learning from the White House and Rich Edson there on the North Lawn. Rich, good morning.
Hey, good morning, Bill. And President Trump is scheduled for his intelligence briefing within the next half hour. And then it's on to his weekly lunch with Secretary of State Mike Pompeo as we wait to see how or if the administration will respond to Iran shooting down that American drone. Officials say that they had targeted the radar installation and surface-to-air battery Iran used to shoot down the drone before President Trump called off the strike. The president tweeted this morning, quote, "Not proportionate to shooting down an unmanned drone. I'm in no hurry. Our military is rebuilt, new and ready to go. By far the best in the world. Sanctions are biting." After President Trump had said yesterday that Iran had made a big mistake in shooting down that drone, he then also stressed his aversion to military action in the region.
Look, I said, I want to get out of these endless wars. Campaigned on that. I want to get out. This is a new wrinkle. This is a new fly in the ointment, what happened shooting down the drone. And this country will not stand for it.
After a briefing here for congressional leaders at the White House yesterday afternoon, Majority Leader Mitch McConnell said the administration response would be measured. Iran's ambassador to the United Nations told NPR yesterday that his country cannot negotiate with someone who is threatening it. For the past year, the Trump administration has applied what it's called its maximum pressure campaign against Iran, sanctions targeting its top exports, top officials. The administration says that certainly over the past month, it has seen a greater threat from Iran and blamed Iran for striking 2 oil tankers in the Gulf of Oman last week.
Thank you,
Bill?
Rich. Rich Edson from the White House there.
Let's bring in Chris Wallace, anchor of Fox News Sunday. You're going to have a big weekend, a big Sunday, Chris. I know you've got a lot of big guests coming up, but what did you make when we learned this morning via tweets from the president that he did confirm that he called off those strikes at the last minute when he learned of the casualties?
Well, I have to say, I think it raises as many questions as it answers. First of all, there was a big National Security Council meeting with the president yesterday where they discussed all of this. And usually the Pentagon is very sophisticated in being able to say, look, here are various target packages. Here's what we would hit. Here's what the collateral damage would be. And any discussion of what collateral damage in terms of deaths on the ground would be is discussed at that point before the president gives an order as to what various targets he wants to hit. So the idea that 10 minutes before the strike, as the president says, you'd suddenly ask, well, gee, how many people are going to be killed if we go ahead with those strikes? That usually is discussed in depth a great deal before that, hours before that ever happens, which raises the question, you know, this is a president who on the one hand talks very tough and has ordered strikes in the past, at least 2 cruise missile attacks against Syria for the use of chemical weapons, but has also made it clear, as he did in that photo op yesterday, that he does not want to get the U.S. more deeply involved in endless wars, and a war with Iran would be a very ugly and prolonged conflict. So it does raise the question, does the president really have the stomach to launch this kind of attack and get more deeply involved, perhaps, in a confrontation with Iran?
What about on the part of Iran, though, Chris? I mean, Lindsey Graham saying that the didn't bring this on. Iran shot down that unmanned drone over international waters. So Lindsey Graham says that Iran's got to knock this off and that we need to inflict severe pain. We know the president's about to have this briefing in the next half hour or so. How do you expect the United States to respond or proceed after that?
Well, I mean, your initial point is absolutely right, Sandra. It is Iran that shot down our drone. It is Iran that attacked those 2 anchors in the Gulf of Oman last week. So, you know, let's make it clear, they bear responsibility, but the president has to decide how the U.S. is going to respond to that. There's a price to action, and obviously that is the possibility of escalation, the possibility that the Iranians could shoot down a U.S. warplane just as they shot down the U.S. drone. But there is also a cost to inaction. And remember, when President Obama decided a few years ago, he declared that red line and said that we would strike back if Syria launched another chemical weapons attack, and then he backed off that. And a lot of people, including Donald Trump as a candidate, and then even as president, said that there was a real cost to that in terms of the U.S. threatening to do something and then not going ahead and doing it. So there's a cost to action. There's also a cost to inaction. What the president is going to do now, who knows? I mean, there's certainly a possibility that he will go ahead and, order another strike when he's assured that there will not be as many casualties on the ground. But on the other hand, it sure does seem like he doesn't have much of an appetite for a strike. I thought it was very noticeable in the photo spray yesterday. On the one hand, he said this was a big mistake. But on the other hand, he then said, well, I don't think it was intentional, and it may have been somebody operating in the dark down the command line. So it appears that there's a kind of a conflict within the president, certainly within his administration, about whether to escalate the military situation here or not to.
The developments yesterday were fascinating. We'll see what happens this morning in the hours ahead, Chris, and we'll watch your show this weekend. But I want to ask you first about 2020 Democrats. There's been some infighting, particularly surrounding comments that Joe Biden made about a segregationist senator and his relationship with him. The Hill takes this on in a piece this morning, quote, the 2020 Dems attacking Joe Biden. In it, they write, Democratic lawmakers warn that Senator Cory Booker and other White House hopefuls taking shots at frontrunner Joe Biden are playing with fire and could wind up helping President Trump win re-election. Lawmakers fear the 2020 Dem presidential primary field is becoming a circular firing squad, with Trump winding up as the beneficiary of internet interfering into that fight. So I just wonder, Chris, from your perspective, do you think that this infighting is going to hurt Joe Biden's chances or affect Democrats in general of running up against the president?
Well, I think the more important point is, I mean, we haven't even gotten to the first debate yet. We're almost 8 months away from people voting in Iowa. The idea that Democrats are going to stand down and not argue with each other is foolish, crazy, and my guess is counterproductive. Of course they're going to go after Biden on the stage in those first debates this next week and throughout the rest of the campaign. You know, as someone once said, politics ain't beanbag. He's got a double-digit lead. People are going to go after him. Yep. And, you know, the argument that you have a tough primary fight that necessarily is going to hurt the eventual nominee, it didn't hurt Barack Obama after he went on for months with Hillary Clinton in 2008. It didn't hurt Donald Trump when he fought for months with Republicans in 2016. I mean, you could make the exact opposite argument, that it toughens a candidate. It shows him the kinds of things he's going to have to face, and better to face them in June of 2019 than it is in October of 2020. So, I mean, one, it's not going to happen. There's obviously not going to be a unilateral ceasefire. And two, I'm not even sure it makes sense.
Still a long way to go. Chris Wallace, thank you. I'm going to promo your show coming up. Tune in to Fox News Sunday. Chris will be sitting down with Republican Senator Tom Cotton, who sits on the Armed Services Committee, and presidential candidate and Democratic governor of Montana, Steve Bullock. That is at 2 and 7 p.m. Eastern, right here on the Fox News channel. Thank you to Chris Wallace.
At 8 past, another alert now, brand new this morning. Court will resume in a moment here after a day of stunning testimony in the murder case of Navy SEAL Eddie Gallagher. A Special Forces medic was on the stand claiming that he was the one and not Gallagher who killed an unarmed ISIS prisoner. Gallagher's wife lashing out at prosecutors after court.
I want everybody to know that you won't hear our story change time and time again. Every one of these witnesses that come up, it's inconsistencies, it's lies, half-truths, and cover-up.
Jonathan Hunt watching that trial live now in San Diego. What happened, Jonathan?
Well, good morning, Bill. First of all, no one would safely predict what might happen in court today after yesterday's dramatic development. But defense attorneys for Chief Edward Gallagher are already suggesting that prosecutors should show up this morning and simply drop their case. Listen here.
This is a case that should never have gotten to this point. If NCIS had done their job, he should never have been arrested in the first place. And so now it remains to be seen whether the prosecution, whether the Navy will admit, okay, maybe we made a mistake, let's go back and regroup.
The U.S. Navy promptly issued a statement in response to that, saying, quote, "The government will not be dropping premeditated murder charges against Chief Petty Officer Gallagher, despite Petty Officer Scott's testimony. The credibility of a witness is for the jury to decide. So we will be back in court in around an hour, but with another SEAL, that man Corey Scott, now having said it was his hands rather than Chief Gallagher's knife that killed the injured ISIS fighter in Iraq in May 2017. And it was clear after that dramatic court moment that Chief Gallagher and his family feel the end is near." Listen again.
And our family's stronger than ever, my husband's stronger than ever, and we're confident that we will come out and my husband will be exonerated and his innocence will be known to everybody after way too long.
But a host of questions remain, Bill. Will the jury believe the SEAL Corey Scott, given that he has an immunity deal? Could Gallagher face lesser charges, given that 2 witnesses have said they saw him stab the ISIS fighter, and he also faces charges of shooting innocent Iraqi civilians? And perhaps the biggest question of all for the community here is, how will this trial in the long run affect the SEAL community that has seen itself torn apart as SEAL fights SEAL in court? Bill?
All great questions. Thank you, Jonathan Hunt, watching that intriguing development from that trial.
Dominican Republic officials holding a news conference on the deaths of at least 11 American tourists in that country. What we are now learning about those cases.
Also, top Republicans calling out the FBI for alleged spying on the Trump campaign. Some lawmakers say the corruption went all the way to the top. Former Congressman Darrell Issa has some thoughts on this. We'll talk to him in a moment here. Coming up live.
The president was falsely accused. Do you investigate how the false accusation happened, or do you continue to investigate something Bob Mueller spent 22 months on?
Now, we just got some breaking news on the Jussie Smollett matter. A judge in Chicago has assigned a special prosecutor. This prosecutor will then investigate the entire criminal case, we are told. We're also told the prosecutor will look at the entire Smollett matter from the very beginning, in addition to the actions by the state attorney Kim Foxx that have been debated publicly. Smollett accused of disorderly conduct, staging a phony hate crime to raise his profile and his salary on the television series Empire. Chicago police have said that they have overwhelming evidence against Smollett, so that has movement as of now today in Cook County, Illinois.
The investigation that matters is the one Bill Barr is doing. If they can use one party's opposition research document, dress it all up, make it appear like it's legitimate intelligence, take it to a secret court, get a warrant to go spy on the other party's campaign. If they can do that to a presidential candidate, imagine what they can do to you and I.
Congressman Jim Jordan there with us last hour, reacting to claims the FBI spied on the Trump campaign, while another GOP lawmaker is accusing some at the top levels of the FBI of working with the media in an inappropriate manner. Darrell Issa is a former California congressman and joins us now. Good morning to you, sir, and great to have you here. Haven't spoken with you in a while. I want to dig into what you just heard from Jim Jordan there when he was speaking to us last hour. The investigation that matters is the one that Bill Barr is doing. What are your expectations for that?
Well, the expectation is that Barr is a professional, that he'll use untainted investigators to figure out whether his own organization, Department of Justice and FBI, did more than we already know. What we already know is, in many ways, the equivalent of a Watergate break-in. What we don't know is how high did it go. We know that Peter Strzok, for example, one of the highest-ranking people in the FBI, was intimately involved and hated the president, and of course famously with Lisa Page said there had to be an insurance policy. What we don't know is who else is involved in this insurance policy and in causing the American people to falsely accuse the President of the United States of collusion with the Russians for 2 years.
You know, and to dig into that second part of what we just heard from Congressman Jordan, if they can use one party's opposition research, he said, dress it up and use it to spy on other party's campaign. Imagine what they can do to you and I. What concerns you as these investigations have played out and what we've learned from them the most?
You know, what concerns me is that decades after Watergate, it looks like an administration at fairly high levels thought it was okay to spy on the president, thought it was okay to get a FISA warrant and to, in fact, investigate the clear nominee of the party during the campaign. This is exactly what we spent decades saying it should never happen again. This is exactly what President Nixon ultimately was impeached or resigned over. So when we look at the Obama administration, the question is, how did it happen on his watch, and how can we keep it from happening again? And that's what Jim Jordan and the Oversight Committee needs to focus on, is how do you keep it from ever happening again? Because this is not something that will ever be tolerated by the American people.
Those are big questions, and ones that the American people hope to get answers to. Moving on to Chairman of the House Freedom Caucus, Mark Meadows. He says that there were several members of the FBI at the top level working with the media. Here's Mark Meadows.
They actually worked with the media to make sure it gets reported so they can use the same media reports to justify their surveillance. You know, when you start to look for the real there, it is there, but it's on the part of the FBI actually planning false narratives in the public domain.
He went further in that interview to lay out how the FBI used leaks to actually get spy warrants.
Well, and he's exactly right. The trail of how you start off with a foreign intelligence individual being paid for by the Democratic National Party and Hillary Clinton to create this false narrative, it got its legitimacy through these processes of essentially getting multiple sources, all of which lead back to the FBI making those multiple sources occur.
All right, former Congressman from California, Darrell Issa, great to have you here on America's Newsroom.
Thanks,
Thank you for joining us. Thank you.
Got another alert here. The House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy backing the president on Iran.
Remember what the president has done. He's rebuilt our military. He's struck in Syria. He's been very strong against Russia with the sanctions and others. So he has a long-term game plan here.
Well, some others are taking exception. In a moment, we'll explain why. There is growing fallout now after the downing of that U.S. drone. Can proposed talks with Tehran prevail? Would they ever happen? We'll have a closer look at that in a moment.
Failed bid back in 2017. You'll remember, after allegations surfaced of sexual misconduct with minors dating back decades. Top Republicans calling on Moore to step out of the race, including the president. Moore responded to that pushback.
Can I win? Yes, I can win. Not only can I, they know I can. That's why there's such opposition.
Democrat Doug Jones narrowly defeating Moore to win that Senate seat in 2017.
Mentioned the story a moment ago. There are developments now in the Jussie Smollett matter in Chicago. A judge has just assigned a special prosecutor to investigate the entire matter. Matt Finn has been on the story from the beginning. We're going to go to Matt now live and find out what is happening outside the courthouse there. Matt, I've got you. Good morning. What's happening?
Good morning, Bill. Well, the judge that just ruled a special prosecutor will investigate the Jussie Smollett case. He says the most important thing here now is that this special prosecutor will restore confidence in the judicial system here in Cook County. The judge ruled that Kim Foxx did not have the authority to appoint her assistant state's attorney as the acting state attorney after she recused herself. The judge said that Kim Foxx created this imaginary role of an acting state attorney, whereas state law here requires that when Sheila O'Brien, she is a former Illinois justice who successfully filed this petition, and she agrees with the judge. She says, why did I do it? I just wanted the public in Cook County. What this means now is that the special prosecutor will basically start all over, investigate the Jussie Smollett case from the start, and this special prosecutor could bring those 16 felony charges against actor Jussie Smollett all over again, and the special prosecutor is also going to look into the actions of Kim Foxx and her office to determine if there is any corruption there. So as if has never ended, now we have a major critical new chapter in which a special prosecutor is going to lay fresh eyes on this case all over again. Bill.
A quick question on that, Matt. What seems to be the tipping point to move forward on that?
You know, Justice Sheila O'Brien, who is still speaking behind me, she filed a petition requesting the special prosecutor on 3 different arguments. She lost 2 out of the 3, but the third one was that state law here clearly requires that when Kim Foxx recused herself, a special prosecutor should have been assigned. Kim Foxx did not have the authority to say, well, now my right-hand man is now going to be the acting state's attorney. The judge upstairs says that rule does not exist, Kim Foxx. That's only in your imagination. When you recused yourself, a special prosecutor should have been assigned, and that's why the judge decided to go ahead with one bill.
Good reporting there, Matt. Thank you, sir. Many of us thought that story was over. Far from it. Matt Finn in Chicago. Thank you.
It'll be a few more days, but we are awaiting a major ruling from the Supreme Court on whether a question about citizenship can be included in the 2020 census. A decision is expected to have major implications for the scope of executive power.
Also, Dominican authorities holding a news conference just an hour ago addressing the sudden deaths of 11 American tourists.
People, I thought, I have 100 and some employees here, and they're worried.
The abortion debate rages on nationwide. Breaking news out of Missouri at this hour, which has now become the first state since Roe v. Wade to not have an abortion clinic. Mike Tobin is live in St. Louis for us this morning. Mike?
Hi, that's Sandra. The Missouri Department of Health and Senior Services has now denied reproductive health services of Planned Parenthood a renewal on its license to continue providing abortion services in the state of Missouri. However, back in June the 10th, Judge Michael Stelzer had put an injunction in place that allowed the clinic to continue providing abortion services. That injunction remains in place. The services will continue until further notice, and further notice is yet undefined. The judge left the next step undefined while they go back to the drawing board in this case. The reaction out of Planned Parenthood is that the state has weaponized the inspection process, particular to that inspection process, as a reason for not renewing the license. The DHSS cited a recent inspection report that focuses on 4 failed abortions, 2 that ended with women hospitalized with serious complications. There are 7 doctors the state wants to interview with regard to the failed procedures. Planned Parenthood has resisted since only 2 of the doctors are staffers with Planned Parenthood. Their attorneys say they cannot compel the other 5 doctors to do the interviews. The DHSS wrote in a letter to Planned Parenthood, "We are forced to infer that each physician who declined to participate in an interview has no satisfactory explanation for the conduct under investigation." Missouri is now a battleground for the abortion debate. The state just passed restrictive laws outlawing abortions after 8 weeks of pregnancy. 2 pelvic exams are required, one with a consultation, one with a procedure 72 hours later. The medical director and a doctor at the clinic now say that first pelvic exam is unnecessary and inhumane. They announced on Wednesday they would start refusing that state mandate for 2 pelvic exams. We see here today the state has now refused their license. They are able to provide abortion services in the meantime, but if that changes, Missouri would indeed become the first state in the union since shortly after the Roe v. Wade decision to not have a legal abortion services provider. However, just across the river, Illinois recently passed some very liberal abortion laws. Sandra?
Mike Tobin, thank you.
With that fresh news now, let's bring in Carrie Severino, Chief Counsel of the Judicial Crisis Network. Carrie, good morning. We brought you in to talk about the census question. I'll get to that in a moment, but just in a general sense, based on, well, there's a lot we do not know in this Missouri matter, but is this the kind of question that could ultimately wind up in the Supreme Court? Is this the kind of case that these justices would take?
It's certainly something they're going to bring a lawsuit on, but we know that the state does have a wide-ranging authority to regulate, make health regulations on abortion that the Supreme Court has upheld. So if those are those health concerns that are causing they're not to renew the clinic, if that's brought up, I think the Supreme Court may end up taking it, but I have to say it's the kind of thing that often has been upheld. It's interesting to see the contrast between the different states' laws, though, because I think we're seeing that increasingly where states, we're seeing a variety of approaches from different states. That's what you would imagine. If one day there were a more freedom for states to have their own abortion law, there's a big variety in how Americans look at it. And a lot of polling is showing that a lot of Americans think there should be more regulation, even pro-choice Americans, more regulation of abortion.
Okay, let's see where it goes from there, and we'll leave it at that, okay? Now the census question. Apparently, well, it's clearly not coming today. argument for adding it on the census for 2020. The administration is arguing what?
Right. Well, the citizenship question is something that for most of our history has been asked on the census in one form or another. It's something that hasn't been asked of every American in recent decades because there's a shorter form that's used. They're saying, let's add this to the shorter form. We need to know this to be able to know how to apportion all of our government services, because we need to know where our citizens actually are. So rather than just asking it on a subset of the surveys the census does, they wanted to add it back to the full census. Again, there's a lot of historical precedent for this, and it's kind of shocking that it's even gotten to this point of a challenge, that you have such a high-level challenge on something that the government really has broad authority to do, to find out how many citizens we have.
Yeah, so the question hasn't been asked yet. Do you see the court ruling on this? Because until it's applied to the form and until the questionnaire goes out, is there a case to be decided before the action happens?
That's one of the real problems here, is they're trying to challenge this on really what amounts to kind of a conspiracy theory, or it's a stretch, saying, well, people saying we can't ask the question because maybe then people won't answer all of the census questions and it's going to make it harder to get full answers on the census. That's pure speculation at this point. And it's also, the government has asked this so many times in the past. It's hard to say now that because of this speculation they can't do it. The Supreme Court has already taken this on an expedited.
Exactly. Let me just show
they
our
have
viewers.
to decide it soon.
Here on screen now, the citizenship questionnaire on line number 1. Administration's argument would help enforce voting rights. The civil rights groups are arguing would lead to undercounting of minority populations. In a general sense, that seems to be the arguments. Yesterday, the White House said, don't send this back to the lower courts. Make a ruling now. What did you think of that move?
Yeah, we've seen last-minute attempts by the challengers to try to delay this further, I think because they want to just push it past that summer deadline and effectively be able to prohibit it from being in the census that way. They've come up with last-minute arguments they're bringing. And what the government said is
that there is no mystery.
We are sorry, but unfortunately people die in situations that we wouldn't want. These are things that happen and are things that will unfortunately continue to happen around the world. But the Dominican Republic, we have to say it, has made a name in the tourism industry.
Now we also noticed very serious in an area where tourism is such a big part of daily life. Sandra?
Very interesting to hear the response there, Jeff. What about the response so far back home here in America?
Well, we know right now the FBI is currently waiting on at least 3 toxicology tests. We could hear about those results next month. We also know that the State Department, when we spoke with them last, they told us again there is no uptick in deaths that have been reported to them. One other congressman yesterday tweeted out, or at least sent a letter, formal letter to the FBI and the State Department calling for more formal updates, and also for the State Department to revisit the current level, the travel advisory level here in the Dominican Republic. That's something the tourism minister touched on today, saying that it's at level 2, and that hasn't changed since this story broke. Sandra?
Jeff Paul in the Dominican Republic for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. The president expected to meet with Mike Pompeo at the White House this after calling off these airstrikes against Iran. Tensions, though, are still out there and still rising. So what then is the next step with Tehran?
You know, we've got to make sure we're not playing checkers with the Iranians. They're great at checkers, you know, change one piece for another. We've got to play chess.
If I were to engage in a little bit of speculation, is that the administration was prepared to launch a retaliatory strike last night, but that they might have wanted to give Iran one last opportunity to come back to the negotiating table before doing so.
President Trump approving, then calling off airstrikes with Iran after Tehran shot down an American drone over the Strait of Hormuz. This amid reports that the president is urging Iran to come to the negotiating table. Here to talk about all this is Dr. Waleed Phares, Fox News national security and foreign affairs analyst. Waleed, good morning to you.
Good morning.
So what should we do next?
Well, first of all, let's understand what is really happening, and really beyond the statements made by officials at this point in time, because they, from the president down to the NSC and others, are dealing with a very complicated, difficult matter. So What we were trying to do as U.S. administration is to put a sort of a pressure around the Iran regime, isolate the Iran regime, mobilize in the region. The Iranians understood that the only way for them to break through is to start with these incidents. So they had drones against Saudi Arabia, possibly them being behind the attacks against the ships. And the last incident, the most important one, was to attack a non-manned vehicle or plane. And that was a test to us. What is it that we're going to do? And let me make one projection here. What the Iranians wanted to see happen, and when that immediate reaction happens, then they're going to call on the international community and let's have a ceasefire, let's go back to the table of negotiations on their terms. The president rejected that, and he said, you will come on my terms and I'll decide when I'm going to take action against you.
Okay, so what about that? What about Iran coming to the negotiating table? The president is urging them to do so. Will they?
Look, the Iranians also understand what the president is doing. He's calling them on the table of negotiations on the one hand. On the other hand, he could mobilization, and not just in the Gulf. What we're doing is consolidating our forces in Syria, in Iraq, making sure that we have enough assets in the region if the Iranians would refuse to continue in that track. So they're going to say, first condition, you stop mobilization. And I think that the president will reject that.
I'm just reading, it's fascinating to see all the reaction pouring in and the differing responses from lawmakers. And one in particular, Adam Kinzinger, the Republican from Illinois, he's flown missions in Iraq. I'm just seeing some new response from him, and I want to run this by you. He said to shoot down a $200 million plane the size of an airliner that could have easily had 35 people in it, there needs to be a response. That's his fresh take on this. Are we going hard enough back on Iran? Should there be a more immediate response, Waleed?
For psychological and media perspectives, maybe political perspectives, yes, they hit us, we hit them back. But we are dealing with Iran not in terms of everything is fine except that incident. There is a strategy of surrounding the Iranian regime. If we decide to engage earlier than our preparation for the isolation, then the Iranians will win. I don't have the material, the information that was discussed at the NSC or with in the White House in general. But for them to make a decision not to immediately react, it means that there is something much wider and more important to take care of, and then we could do the reaction the way we see fit.
Got it. Here's the president's tweet, one of them, this morning on Iran. He said, quote, I am in no hurry. Our military is rebuilt, new and ready to go, by far the best in the world. Sanctions are biting, and more added last night. Iran can never have nuclear weapons, not against the USA and not against the world. We had a member of the president's team on this program yesterday morning said that those sanctions are working beautifully. Ambassador Danny Danon joined us earlier in this program this morning. He says that we need to go even tougher with sanctions. There should be more. He called on our European allies to get tougher on Iran. What about the global community, and especially when it comes to sanctions?
Look, we have the U.S., we have Israel, we have the entire Arab coalition. That's what counts really in the region. We have other allies in Latin America, in Eastern Europe. But at the end of the day, all put pressure on the Iranian regime. Now, the other arm that we need, and that's my opinion, to see activated is the Iranian people, the Iranian opposition, and other oppositions in Lebanon, in Syria, in Iraq, in Yemen. This other channel is going to basically take advantage of these pressures done by the sanctions and put their own pressures on the Iranian regime at the end of the day.
Very interesting stuff. Waleed Faris, thank you. Appreciate you coming on America's Newsroom.
Thank you.
Developments on this when they come in from the White House and the Pentagon. In the meantime, Outnumbers coming your way in 12 minutes. Here is Melissa Francis. Hello there.
These comments defending his past words with segregationist senators. Biden still refusing to apologize in book, not offering the apology that Biden demanded either, whether it will impact Biden's frontrunner status, plus pundit Piers Morgan and Michael Moore both predicting that President Trump will win re-election. They're